The sound wasn't a crack, it wasn't a thud, it was an explosion of crystal and ego, a sonic boom that announced the end of an era even as everyone in the room tried desperately to pretend it never happened. A heavy Baccarat Massena whiskey tumbler, $75 in 1965 money, the kind you only found in the Fontainebleau's Versailles suite or in the homes of Meyer Lansky's most favored associates, smashed against the wall with ballistic force. It didn't just shatter, it vaporized into a constellation of jagged diamonds, 1,000 points of reflected light from the vanity mirror, suddenly flying through air thick with Chanel No. 5 and fear. One lethal spear of glass spun in a slow, deadly arc, catching the light before catching the sleeve of Dean Martin's Brioni jacket, missing the artery in his left wrist by less than the width of a cigarette paper. The dressing room, moments before buzzing with the electric, sweaty adrenaline of a packed show, plunged into a vacuum of silence. You could hear the hum of the struggling air conditioner, a relic already obsolete in the face of Miami's humid February. You could hear the distant, rhythmic roar of the Atlantic, a machine no man could control. And you could hear the wet, ragged asthma of power, the heavy, irregular breathing of Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board, who had just tried to unmake his best friend. Frank stood in the epicenter of a wreckage, his tuxedo tie undone and hanging like a noose. His face, the famously controlled mask of American cool, was a topographic map of pure, unadulterated rage, veins like cables against his collar, a tick jumping beneath his left eye. His hands shook not with fear, but with the seismic energy of violence restrained, a dam about to burst. Opposite him, a statue of casual defiance, Dean Martin didn't flinch, he didn't blink, he didn't even glance at the glass that could have opened his wrist to the bone. He simply took a long, theatrical drag from his Kent cigarette, exhaled a slow, deliberate plume of smoke that hung between them like a ghost, and looked at Frank not with anger, nor fear, but with a profound, soul-crushing pity. In that room, on that specific night, February 12, 1965, 11:47 p.m., the mythology of the Rat Pack stopped being a legend and became a fragile human thing, bleeding on a plush velvet carpet. But to understand the true depth of that moment, you must leave the two giants, turn your eyes to the corner. Pressed against the wall, a hand clamped over her own mouth to trap a scream, was Sarah Levin, the 22-year-old makeup artist. This was her dream job, her big break. Yet in Frank's twisted face, she didn't see a superstar. She saw her father, Moishe Levin, a master tailor in Brooklyn, whose hands had begun their faint, inevitable tremor the day the factory announced it was moving operations to Taiwan. It was the same look, the terror of obsolescence, the rage of a craftsman being told his craft no longer mattered. For Sarah, this wasn't a showbiz spat. It was the ancient, universal panic of a man watching his world dissolve. Near the door, a mountain of a man named Big Tony Roselli stood frozen, his usual cool gone. Tony had seen things, mob hits at the Copa, bone-breaking bar fights, but this paralyzed him. Hidden motive and alternate perspective. Tony was secretly on the retain of Sam Giancana, tasked with a simple job: keep an eye on Frank, the mob's favorite pet. As the glass flew, Tony wasn't calculating how to break up a fight. His mind was doing cold, hard Chicago math. If this friendship shattered, what happened to the delicate, lucrative ecosystem built around them? The Rat Pack was a joint venture, a cash machine for the families through hotel kickbacks, casino activity, and film investments. A split meant instability. Instability meant lost revenue. Lost revenue demanded explanation. Tony's fear wasn't physical, it was professional. He was witnessing a $1 million asset immolate itself. Frank's rage that night was a volcano with a deep, complex geology. The common story is right. 1965 was a cliff edge. The Beatles weren't just on Ed Sullivan. They were in the studio revolutionizing recording itself. Rock was no longer music. It was the marching beat of a cultural coup. But hidden motive number 2 arrived that morning via a brutal 10 a.m. phone call from Frank's business manager. Variety had just leaked the terms of Dean's renewed NBC contract for the Dean Martin Show, $34 million over 3 years, with unprecedented creative control. For Frank, who struggled in the medium and whose own production deals were fraught, that number wasn't just money, it was a verdict. It was the audience, the executives, the very culture saying the easygoing hedonist is worth more than the tortured artist. The glass wasn't aimed at Dean, it was aimed at that headline. There's a missed detail in the psychology here. Frank wasn't just jealous of Dean, he was haunted by a specific ghost, Mario Lanza, the brilliant, volatile tenor whose voice was a force of nature, but whose career imploded in a haze of binge-eating, tantrums, and self-sabotage. Frank saw Lanza in every mirror, heard his fate in every note that didn't land perfectly. His outburst was a preemptive strike against his own potential collapse. And Dean's pity, it was born of grim experience. He'd seen this mask of creative jealousy before, not on Frank, but on Jerry Lewis during their final soul-grinding days as Martin and Lewis. The same paranoid accusations, "You're upstaging me," the same terror of being alone on the stage. Dean's calm was the calm of a veteran surgeon facing a familiar catastrophic injury. He'd already navigated one apocalyptic professional divorce. He knew the cost, the barren silence on the other side. He had no appetite for another. "You did that on purpose," Frank hissed, his voice now a low, dangerous whisper, the kind heard in back rooms of union halls. "It's the act, Frank. That's the bit. You're the star. I'm the clown." "You weren't a clown tonight," Frank screamed, the dam breaking, taking a step forward that made Big Tony tense. "You think that TV money makes you better? That you don't need the chairman anymore?" What Frank didn't know, the missed detail that would have fractured him completely, was that Dean had altered the act for him. Sonny Burke, the show's producer, confirmed in a 1982 interview that Dean, sensing Frank's brittle mood during rehearsal, had personally cut 3 of his own planned solo numbers from the set list. "Give the time to Frank," Dean had muttered. "He needs to feel the room." The crowd's adoration for Dean that night was, in part, a reaction to his perceived generosity, a warmth Frank mistakenly interpreted as a hostile takeover. The confrontation laid bare Frank's core resentment. "You're lazy, Dean, a lazy, talented son of a bitch who doesn't respect his own gift." This was Frank's crucifixion. He worked 18-hour days to be Frank Sinatra. The phrasing, the timing, the arrangements, the politics. Dean Martin seemed to become Dean Martin by accident, between golf swings and naps. It was an injustice that poisoned Frank's soul. Dean could have ended it all right there. He was a skilled boxer in his youth. He could have laid Frank out with one punch to the liver. Or, more cruelly, he could have wielded the truth. "Frank, Strangers in the Night is a year away. Your last #1 was Learnin' the Blues in 1955. My Everybody Loves Somebody knocked the Beatles off the top last year. They like me because I don't need them to like me." If he had said any of that, the history of American entertainment would have fractured. The Rat Pack dies in Miami. Ocean's 11 has no sequels. The iconic image of mid-century male camaraderie never coheres. Instead, Dean performed the most masterful bit of his career. He walked past the seething Frank, past the terrified Sarah, to the portable bar. He ignored his own bottle, ginger ale, always. He picked up the Jack Daniels, Frank's drink. He poured 2 fingers into a fresh glass, the glug, 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 obscenely loud in the silence. He turned and walked back, standing toe-to-toe with the man who had just attempted to scar him. He held out the glass. "Frankie?" "Don't you smooth this over," Frank spat, but the fury was cracking. "Take the drink." Psychological analysis. What Dean did next was a calculated act of ego depreciation, a tactic of making oneself seem non-threatening to disarm a superior force. He had learned it in the mob-owned clubs of Cleveland, disarming drunk, violent owners with a smile and a bowed head. He wasn't just being kind, he was performing strategic disarmament. "You know what your problem is?" Dean asked, his voice soft but firm. Frank braced for the killing blow. "Your problem is you think you gotta earn it every night. Like if you don't bleed on that stage, they'll stop loving you." "They will," Frank whispered, a desperate confession. "No, that's how you work." Dean took a sip. "Look at me, Frank. I'm a hustle." The admission was shocking in its humility. "I'm a guy from Steubenville who won the lottery. I can't sing like you. I can't phrase a song like you. Nobody can. You're the voice, Frank. There's only one." He invaded Frank's space, but with warmth, not threat. "Tonight they laughed at my jokes, 'cause jokes are cheap. But when you sang Angel Eyes, Frank, I saw a woman in the front row, diamonds on her neck, crying black tears into her martini. You touched her. I just passed the time." It was a magnificent, merciful lie. Dean Martin was a masterful, intuitive vocalist whose baritone could break hearts. But in that moment, he made himself small to make his friend feel big again. He sacrificed his own artistic truth to patch the hole in Frank's soul.
Frank's face crumbled. The anger dissolved, leaving raw, naked shame. His lip quivered. "I threw a glass at you, Dee. I could have—" "You missed," Dean said, a faint grin appearing. "You're getting old, Pally. Your aim's for crap." A sound escaped Frank, half sob, half laugh. He took the glass. Their fingers brushed. "I'm scared, Dean. I'm losing it." Dean put a hand on his shoulder. "You ain't losing nothing. You're just holding on too tight. Let go. Let me be the clown. You just stand there and sing. That's all you gotta do." The reconciliation was immediate, but the scars remained, invisible filaments that would forever alter the relationship. Unseen consequences, 10 years later. In 1975, at a private fundraiser for St. Jude's, a drunk and melancholy Frank cornered Dean near the coat check. "That night at the Fontainebleau," he began, slurring. Dean cut him off with a wave. "Forget it, Pally. We were young and stupid." Frank gripped his arm, hard. "No, I don't forget. I see that glass. I see it in my sleep sometimes." The incident had become Frank's lifelong penance, a private horror story he relived. Unseen consequences, 20 years later. At the 1985 NBC TV special, Frank Sinatra, the Man and His Music, a gaunt, already ailing Dean Martin was coaxed on stage. Frank hugged him, a fierce, clinging embrace that lasted a full 30 seconds on national television, whispering into his ear. Microphones caught nothing, but Elliot Weissman, Frank's manager, wrote in his memoir. Frank whispered, "For the glass, Dino. I'm sorry for the glass." Dean just patted his back and said, "What glass?" The modern parallel. This is not a period piece. We see this dynamic daily. The veteran CEO who feels threatened by the intuitive, relaxed genius of a Silicon Valley disruptor. The aging athlete who resents the rookie making greatness look effortless. The lead actor who feels upstaged by a scene-stealing supporting player. The Sinatra-Martin crisis is the eternal blueprint for the trauma of relevance in the face of unchained natural talent. It's in every corporate boardroom, every creative studio, every team that has ever had to pass the torch. What if scenario? Let's play it out. What if Dean had retaliated? He throws a punch, a real one. Nose cartilage cracks. The room erupts. The story hits Walter Cronkite by morning, Rat Pack rumble, Sinatra Martin brawl. The partnership shatters that night. Ocean's 11 is a one-off novelty. The summit at the Sands never becomes a cultural touchstone. Frank, unmoored from his stabilizing force, spirals deeper into paranoia and bitterness, his late career resurgence never finding its footing. Dean's cool persona is permanently tarnished by a public violent feud. His show might still be a hit, but the beloved national treasure aura is gone. The entire iconography of mid-century American cool, the tuxedos, the ringside tables, the easy laughter, never coalesces into myth. Both men become cautionary tales of ego, not legends of camaraderie. The second show that night, the midnight set, was indeed legendary, but from Sarah Levin's perspective, backstage applying fresh foundation, she saw the cost. Under the bright bulbs, she saw Frank's broken capillaries around his eyes, not from anger, but from spent tears. She saw Dean, changed into his impeccable gray suit, discreetly slip $100 bill, a small fortune for a porter, to the young man who had cleaned up the glass, a silent transaction for eternal silence. She saw Big Tony finally exhale, pull out a handkerchief, and wipe his own brow, his value as an asset manager preserved. The life lesson here is counterintuitive. Our culture venerates the Sinatras, the passionate, the driven, the fiercely hungry artists who bleed for their craft. But civilization and friendship often hinge on the Martins, the ones who project ease not from lack of care, but from a deeper care, for peace, for loyalty, for the fragile ecosystem of human connection. True strength is not the force that shatters the glass. It is the steady hand that sweeps it up, pours a restorative drink, and decides the show isn't over. It's the courage to absorb chaos and reflect back calm. Frank Sinatra died with a legacy of unparalleled artistry, but Dean Martin, in that one quiet, explosive moment, forged a legacy of a different kind, the master of the hardest performance of all, forgiveness in real time, without an audience, without a score. So the next time you see that famous black and white photo of them, tuxedoed and roaring with laughter at the Sands, remember the $34 million contract. Remember the ghost of Mario Lanza. Remember Sarah Levin seeing her father's fear and Big Tony calculating his report to Chicago. Remember that the most powerful force in that opulent, broken room was not in the throw, but in the graceful, deliberate, world-saving decision not to throw it back. This is the untold legacy, not just of a star, but of the man who knew that sometimes the only way to win is to let the other guy think he has. If this story revealed to you that the pinnacle of cool is a form of profound strength, leave a comment below. In our next video, we descend into the sterile, silent hell of a hospital room on Christmas Day, 1987, for the tragedy Dean's cool could never deflect, the loss of his son, Dean Paul, and the day the music truly, irrevocably died. Until then, keep swinging, and remember, the most powerful reaction is often the one the world never gets to see. The quiet that settled after the second show was of a different character. It wasn't the vacuum of impending violence, but the heavy, exhausted silence of a battlefield after the truce has been called. The broken glass was gone, but its phantom outline remained on the carpet, a ghost only the two of them could see. As Dean shrugged on his overcoat, Frank lingered by the doorway, a man emotionally spent. Hidden motive number 3. The financial lifeline. What almost no one knew was that Dean's financial stability was, at that very moment, the invisible glue holding Frank's world together. While Frank's money was famously tied up in volatile ventures and legal fees, Dean, the supposed lazy one, had a mind like an actuarial table. Through his manager, Mickey Rudin, Frank had quietly taken a series of short-term loans against future earnings to cover a tax lien. The primary guarantor for those loans? Claude Productions, a shell company owned by Dean Martin. Dean never mentioned it. He never used it as leverage, but when Frank looked at Dean in that dressing room, part of the terror wasn't just artistic jealousy. It was the gut-churning fear of being financially beholden to the man he perceived as his carefree inferior. Dean's act of pouring the drink was, in the unspoken language of their world, also a reassurance. The ledger is irrelevant. You are my friend. Sarah Levin, packing her makeup kit with trembling hands, was approached by Big Tony. He pressed a folded $50 bill into her palm. "For your silence, kid, and your discretion," he grunted, his eyes saying the rest, "or else." But then Dean, catching the exchange from across the room, gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He walked over. "Sarah, sweetheart, you did great tonight. Real professional." He took the $50 from her hand and replaced it with 2 crisp $100 from his own money clip. "This is for the extra work. Forget the other." He didn't look at Tony. The message was clear. The loyalty here was to the talent, not to the muscle in the shadows. For Sarah, that moment redefined power. It wasn't in threats. It was in the quiet, generous override of them. Alternate perspective. The winner who lost. Later that night, at Jilly's saloon, the party was in full swing. Hangers-ons, journalists, and starlets laughed too loudly, trying to pierce the bubble of intensity surrounding the two principals. Seated at the corner of the bar, nursing a real bourbon for the first time that night, was Sammy Bavis Jr. He watched Frank clap Dean on the back, watched Dean's easy smile not quite reach his eyes. Sammy, the eternal outsider, the one who had to work 10 times harder for a fraction of the adoration, understood the dynamics with painful clarity. In 1989, in his autobiography, he wrote of that night, "Frank needed Dean's love like oxygen, and Dean, God bless him, gave it, but it cost him. I saw the price in the set of his shoulders. For Frank to be the sun, Dean had to agree to be the moon, reflecting his light. And the moon, for all its beauty, is a cold, silent rock." Sammy was right. The unseen consequence of that night was the solidification of a role. Dean became Frank's necessary counterweight, his shock absorber. In future planning meetings for films or club dates, if Frank grew volatile, all eyes would subtly shift to Dean. A raised eyebrow, a muttered, "Hey, Pally, relax," was enough to dial back the temperature. Dean was drafted without his explicit.
The modern parallel in therapy terms. A contemporary psychologist would label the dynamic codependent, with Frank as the classic narcissistic personality, craving constant validation, prone to rage when injured, and Dean as the hyper-competent, emotionally contained enabler. Dean's cool was not merely an attitude, it was a sophisticated survival mechanism, a firewall against Frank's emotional wildfires. He managed Frank's instability so the world, their business, their friends, their empire, could function. This pattern repeats everywhere, in the genius founder whose volatility is managed by the steady COO, in the brilliant artist whose personal chaos is contained by a long-suffering partner. The Rat Pack's glamour disguised a very common, very human system of emotional bookkeeping. What if, Part 2, the ripple through time? Consider the cultural ripple if Dean had walked out that night. Without the stabilizing force of their partnership, does Frank's 1966 album Strangers in the Night, the comeback that revived his career, even happen? The title track was a piece of pop fluff Frank initially despised. It was Dean, according to arranger Ernie Freeman, who heard the demo and told Frank, "It's a hit, you dope. Swallow your pride and sing the kids' song." No Dean, no coaxing. Frank might have trashed the tape. The Grammy for Record of the Year vanishes. The Chairman's second act stutters. Furthermore, the entire aesthetic of masculine cool shifts. Without the perfected dichotomy of Sinatra's intensity and Martin's ease, the model becomes one-dimensional. A generation of actors and singers, from Steve McQueen to Michael Bublé, drew from both wells. McQueen took Frank's rebel pride and Dean's minimalist detachment. Bublé blends Frank's musical precision with Dean's lounge lizard relaxation. Remove one pillar and the archetype collapses. 20 years later, the final reckoning. The story ends, as these stories often do, in silence. In the mid-'80s, Frank's calls to Dean's house in Beverly Hills became more frequent, often late at night. He'd ramble about the old days, about the Fontainebleau, about the good fights. Dean, increasingly a recluse, would listen, grunting occasionally into the phone. His daughter, Deanna Martin, recalls finding him after one such call in 1986. He was sitting in his den, in the dark, staring at a framed photo from the Ocean's 11 set. "You okay, Dad?" she asked. He was quiet for a long time. "Yeah, sweetheart, just thinking. It's a terrible thing to need someone more than they need you." He wasn't talking about himself. When Dean died on Christmas Day 1995, Frank was shattered but too ill himself to attend the funeral. He sent a wreath of white roses so massive it wouldn't fit through the chapel doors. The card, in Frank's now shaky script, read simply, "My brother, my balance, Francis." The ultimate lesson of that night in 1965 was not about controlling rage, but about the economics of friendship. Dean Martin made the most valuable investment of his life in that dressing room. He paid the immediate, steep price of his own pride, but the long-term dividend was the preservation of a bond that defined them both. He bought Frank's soul back from the brink, and in doing so, secured his own legacy not just as a star, but as the anchor of the most famous fraternity in show business history. The glass was a question hurled across a room. The drink was the answer, and the answer was love, served neat with no chaser.